Not unlike every other round of coronavirus relief checks, scammers are already targeting how to figure out to defraud you of the funds that the government is sending you. Kevin Campbell, CEO of Syniti, cybersecurity expert, joins us. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Kevin, I guess there's no ends here as to what folks will do to try and scam people out of their money, and when you're doing it over the internet, and when we're relying completely and totally upon cybersecurity, and they sit around figuring out how to defeat these systems, one has to wonder if we ever really can protect ourselves.
Well, I think the key is that we have to remain, the bad guys keep getting better at being bad, right? So,
right.
And, while everybody's at home during this pandemic, they're at home too, working twice as hard. And we've gone from, the kid who is hacking into it from the basement image to, these are sophisticated rings. They're hiring talented people, and they're working really hard on it. And figuring out how to be clever and clever. And, of course, they work at targeting the vulnerable populations of people who need money immediately and people who still don't remember what your mom taught you, which is if it's too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true.
That probably may be the best advice ever, is just trust your instincts more so than anything else, right?
Yep. And I think, the key thing they're doing right now, Neil, is that they are they're making things look like they're real ads, right? And real ads from banks, from Microsoft, from Google, from anything else, and they're trying to get you to click on a link. So there's one easy thing that people can do, which takes a little bit more work, but don't ever click on a link. And if you're you got to really make sure you know who it's from and the name and email match, because that's another way to do it. But the big thing is don't click on a link. If you're really interested in a site, go to that site, right? Type it into your browser, the name of that site, and go directly to it. Don't use the links, because most of these scams right now are all based on some fancy ad. It can even be real pictures that they've cut and pasted in there, and it looks, even somebody like me who spends a lot of time on it, it looks just like something from Microsoft, and you can't tell the difference. But you click on it, and it all of a sudden, grabs your password along with your email. So then you're compromised.
Separate and apart from the technology itself, though, I guess it's also wise for people just to pay attention. So, for example, one of the most recent scams that has been uncovered is folks sending emails trying to trick Americans into filling out a phony form to apply for the American Rescue Plan checks, when we know that that's not the process. There's not an application for same, right?
Correct. And what I always tell people is, the government will never contact you. If you've contacted them and asked them to contact you, you have a hard time getting them to contact you. So they will never proactively reach out and say, here's how to get this check. Here's how, there's money left over with your name on it. Come get it. But it's not ever going to happen in our lifetimes, in anybody's lifetime. So those are all things that should trigger you right away. Anytime you fill in a form, right, or an Excel spreadsheet or anything like that, you're giving that information up. And people who are legitimate will never ask you for that information. And if they ask you for your Social Security number, it'll be the last 4 digits, because they presumably know it. But the scammers just ask you for the whole thing. You type it in, and they got your ID. Or they've got your banking. But the other thing I tell people about banking that's hugely important is all the banks use two-factor authentication today. And two-factor authentication is like just putting a second lock on your door, right?
Yeah.
And so you should sign up for that option. But they count on the fact that we're going to want to do it easier, and we're not going to take that extra step. But that extra step really provides a lot of extra protection.
We're talking to Kevin Campbell, CEO of Syniti. He's a cybersecurity expert. Kevin, one of the issues that's out there, I think, that is kind of tricking people into responding to these emails is that a lot of the unemployment compensation processes that are run by states are heavily reliant upon technology, where you go to their website and you sign up for this email alert or that, and you're interacting that way. They're encouraging that as opposed to going through the phone banks that they're operating. Mm-hmm. So when they receive something, they immediately believe that it's a follow-up to something that they sent in. What should they do first?
Again, I think there are rare cases where they will actually follow up with something that doesn't take you to their website, right? So be careful of anything where you can't go straight to the website and get on a Q&A. And if you do, make sure when there's a from in every email, there's a name there, right, which is the name of the person, and then there's an email. Make sure those two match, because what you'll see is I'll see Lisa Jones, and then I'll see the email is from Betty at, Betty from Bulgaria, or, Paul from some other remote country. And so that matching, so what they do is what they're doing is masking. So they'll say local, unemployment, but then the email is somebody totally different in a different country.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that the Labor Department, or U.S. Department of Labor Inspector General, found last year $36 billion were stolen in unemployment benefits. I mean, that number is staggering.
Staggering. But again, if you're somebody who's trying to make money online, all you got to do is figure out a scheme that works, and they're diligent, right? They will spend a lot of time studying how the process works and say where can they insert themselves in that process. So the key for you is to make sure that you're talking directly to the person or to the area that you expect in unemployment benefits, or whatever benefits you're looking to relieve.
A lot of this fraud and scamming is actually not done here domestically, right? I mean, this has an international flavor to it, obviously makes investigative efforts even harder. Not a really high success rate, although they have had more successes here lately, but it's still not a high success rate in investigating this and shutting it down.
Yeah, and as I said before, it used to be kids in basements, but now they're recruiting. I mean, these firms, the size of some of these firms is staggering, and they're recruiting, MBAs out of their best schools. And they're just, the value proposition is simple. You can make more money illegally by 2, 3, 4x than you can, going to work in finance in one of our organizations. So we've known, for a long time there are areas in Russia, and the Eastern Bloc in general that do this. There are also areas in South Africa that do this quite frequently, and those areas are all known to our authorities in the United States, and they spend a lot of time trying to work on it. But the reality is they're pretty sophisticated, and so usually by the time your money is transferred, it's quickly in 5 other hands, and those people have disappeared.
And these firms are able to reach out and touch someone in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, a day. And what they're simply doing is changing the script from day to day, 365 days a year, right? Correct.
They're keeping random numbers and groups of people. The good news is, people like Microsoft and Google and so on, every time, they have filters that filter these out. And they work with the agencies to get, anytime they capture where the sources are coming from, they put those in the filters. But that's why these people need to keep on rotating to try to get past the filters. I'm sure your company has significant filters on the way in. We all have less filters on our own personal computers, and we're spending more time on our home computers. So we need to be careful about that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it gets to the point where the technology now is an inconvenience. Just validating oneself and having to change passwords, and then you start reading stories, and then it totally validates why they're doing what they're doing, because a lot of these systems are susceptible. And now even, there's a lot of conversation, a lot of bills in Congress in and around, not to bring up a controversial issue, but voting, and whether or not you're going to be able to do that over the internet at some point in time. And there are those that are trying to completely outlaw that because the susceptibility is so high.
Yeah, and there's just so much fraud that's going on, both intentional and unintentional, right? And, the good news is we will get better at electronic signatures. We will get better at, electronic footprints. But, the bad guys are working twice as hard. And to the point you made before, they're counting on the fact that we're going to put it in the too hard pile. So we're going to say, you know what, I'm not going to change my password as often. I like to remind people all the time, 40% of all passwords in the world are still password. So most people just, type in password and then they're done. But it doesn't take a lot to get those.
Wait, say that again.
Right?
40% of the passwords in the world is the word password?
Correct.
Jeez. That's amazing.
And so, yeah. So if I've got a list of, I don't have to, if I've got a list of 100,000 emails, and I just type in those, forget about any scams, I type in those emails and the word password, I probably got a couple hits there.
Right.
Now, can I find anything that's there? I always tell people also, if you think we've made progress, which we have, turn your roaming on your phone and go down the street and see how many of your neighbors don't have a password on their home internet. You'll be surprised.
Yeah, and you have scammers that can just drive down the street, stop in front of a house, try to hit your Wi-Fi, and the next thing you know, they've penetrated your whole system.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. So it counts on our diligence to change our passwords, especially if you suspect. People say all the time, I clicked on a link and I don't feel good about it now. Well, go change your password right away, right? That's the first thing. And use that two-factor authentication. As much as it's an extra step, really that getting it to your mobile phone and having you type in a second number, it takes 2 seconds, but it makes a huge, huge difference, and that's why the banks are all using it.
We're talking to Kevin Campbell, CEO of Syniti, a cybersecurity expert. Kevin, still best advice to use uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols in your password?
Yes. Absolutely. And the best advice is change it every 30 days or every 90 days on the outside.
So these software programs that you have to manage passwords, how susceptible are those to being hacked? I mean, because of the convenience factor and the ease of administration, and when you get older like me and sometimes I can't remember my name, much less a password. You use these other tools to help you in that respect, but aren't you you're sitting out there as a target as well there?
Well, if you buy, you're talking about a password vault, right? Is what they typically call them, right? A vault where it will keep all your passwords for you and put them in there. Now, the best thing with those vaults is let it randomly generate the password, right?
Okay.
So, because it's going to generate a set of combinations that you will never remember, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so it makes it hard for them to guess. So now the only problem is, do they get hacked into? Well, the reality is, as long as we've run into a few incidents where the company that was producing the password vault went out of business and people kept using it, and that means they're not updating their internal security and keep going on the way. So as long as you can check really quickly, that the company is, an ongoing entity, and that they're updating their certifications and so on. Those are very safe.
Yep. Best advice then, understand the business practices. The government typically is not going to contact you by email, and don't click on anything.
And the last thing is just think about your data. You generate a lot of data, but the most sensitive data is your banking data, right? And we tell our corporate clients and any of our private advice we give the same thing. So make sure you protect that with an extra lock and an extra degree of care.
Yep. How often also, you said 40% of passwords in the world is the word password. Mm-hmm. I find that, and I've heard a lot of people use their Social Security number as a password.
Ooh, I had not heard that very frequently. That's a bad idea. Because then they got two things. Yeah.
Go ahead.
They got two things once they get it, right? They got your password to get into your banking stuff, and then they got your Social Security, which is the key to your identity. Once they have your Social Security number and your address and your date, and if they can figure out your date of birth, but there's plenty of ways to do it if you have your Social Security number today, they can create an ID that's actually you.
Yeah.
There's another way to stop that, which is take your credit file and the credit monitoring. There's simple credit monitoring services for very low cost per month, and they will lock your credit file. So anybody who tries to access, create a new entity, get new credit cards, any of the other stuff, you're alerted from that.
I've always been mystified by these folks on Facebook that put their date of birth and their home address on their Facebook profile. I'm like, why is it important to do that? More importantly, why is it important not to do that?
Well, Facebook's turned into a dating app, and so a lot of people are putting that information in there for exactly that reason, so people know how far away they are from them and how old they are. But if you have that information anytime, I think it's just good advice not to put your address on very much of anything, so people can't show up at your house, or they can't use it or send things there. Zip code, if you'll notice at your gas station pumps and almost all your other places, zip code is an important thing if they ask you to use your existing credit cards. All kinds of reasons why you don't want your address out there. And certainly your birthday, including all the digits, right? If you just want to put your day and the month and year, the month and the day, people can wish you happy birthday, which is nice, but then don't add the year, because you need all three pieces of month, day, year to make it work. So I think that's people oversharing.
Yeah. I tend to fall on the other side. The less I put out about myself out there, and I think the better off I am. And I think if a lot of other people, as I said, I'm completely mystified by how much information they put out about themselves on these websites. Every time I see it, it kind of drives me crazy, and I shake my head saying, why? And then they wonder why they get hacked, or they get their identity stolen or manipulated, or something other. That there's nothing really good that's going to come out of that, right?
Yes, absolutely. Nothing good from oversharing.
Yep, absolutely. Kevin Campbell, thank you so much, CEO of Syniti, a cybersecurity expert. We appreciate your time and your insight. Have a great weekend.
Thanks. You too, and thanks for having me on.